My husband and I have been together for 8 years now. I have 2 sons from my previous marriage, 13 and 9, and I just gave birth to my husband's daughter 3 months ago. Prior to giving birth, and even a few weeks following, our home life was great. We often had friends telling us they wish they could find someone who made them as happy as him, and I made each other. There was hardly ever any disagreement. Our communication was solid. He was fantastic with my boys, attending every parent-teacher conference, doctor's appointment, school event, etc., and took them out often to play baseball and basketball. This all changed around 3 weeks after I gave birth. He turned angry, depressed, and impatient. The kids and I started having to constantly walk on eggshells. He became lazy, such as stopping cleaning up after himself or helping around the house, yet still used sentences such as, "You guys need to pick up after yourself. Me and your mother shouldn't have to follow you around and clean up your messes," when he never cleaned at all. I couldn't even get him to wash his own dinner plate without him having a meltdown, basically. Every day he was just angry. If one thing went wrong, like him not being able to find something he set down somewhere which became an everyday event, he was freaking out, saying things like, "Yup, awesome, so glad life wants to frick me over," or "Why the frick does this always happen to me? Can't I just have a good freaking day for once?" But he always made it me and the kids' problem. If he lost something, it didn't matter what time of day it was. He was 100% flipping out and expecting me to find it for him. I even told him my oldest son had to go to the emergency room because he had a bad rash, and he goes, "Have your mom take him," because he was using my vehicle. Or the other day, my mood has been soured due to his early morning freakout, and it put me on a rough road. I was exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep, and he rushed me out of the house to go do his errands with him. I didn't even get out of the car, so it was pointless, and then gets pissed and screams, "What the frick is your problem? Can't we just have a good day for once?" As if I am the reason his life sucks. And this is not the man I married. So last night around 11:30 p.m., he starts freaking out again. He lost an important item he needed for work. He starts slamming things around our bedroom, repeatedly saying things like, "Fucking great, freaking awesome, freaking love it," until I got up and started helping him look. As soon as I got up out of bed, he stops looking and just walks behind me holding his phone's flashlight. We can't find it. He doesn't go to work as a result, another trait he's picked up since giving birth. He literally calls out over the wind blowing wrong. I lay back down. He practically body slams the bed beside me, starts huffing and puffing, heavy sighing and growling while practically clawing at his face, talking about how freaking stupid this life is. I asked him to stop and he says, "Fuck you." So I tell him I'm done. I'm leaving and that me and my children's stuff will be out of the home by today. He says, "What the frick ever," and goes to sleep. I wake up at 5 a.m. and start packing. He comes out around 7, asking what I'm doing, and I tell him again that I'm done and I'm leaving. He says I'm leaving him in his time of need and he would never do that to me. But he kind of did, because I was diagnosed with postpartum depression not even 4 days after giving birth, and he completely overrode it and made it about him and how much his life sucks. For example, "I know you're feeling some type of way, but I have shoot going on too. No one asks me how the frick I am." Or literally making passive-aggressive comments like, "Wish I could sleep all day when I was 6 days postpartum after I fell asleep on the couch." He does no nighttime duty. As I said, he says I'm leaving him in his time of need, and that I should have urged him to get therapy instead of walking away. But his anger has made me hate him. I don't even want to be near him. To add, I'm just going to reiterate what I've said to some commenters. I have tried talking to him about this. It's an immediate blame shift the second that I bring up anything that is bothering me. He says I'm attacking him, says things like, "As if you don't have freaking issues that I have to deal with every day." He tells me it's all in my head and has even called me a narcissist quite a few times in the past 2 months, claiming that I'm accusing him of things because things aren't going my way. He often says he does everything and that me and my kids, don't respect him. So I have tried talking to him. He's completely defensive and refuses to actually speak on issues. Outside of one single time when he was drinking and admitted that he's being a jerk and that we don't deserve to be treated this way. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot. For the sake of your children, leave before the verbal outbursts become physical. Yes, talk to the songs and you may get a different outlook. You don't need to hang around while he gets medical or psychiatric help. Is he using any drugs or alcohol? Or is he withdrawing from nicotine or something else? The abrupt change sounds like there is a substance abuse problem too. Comment 2. I wish we could hear from the teenager in this house to get a sense if stepdad was actually perfect before. But really, it's no matter. The guy is a nightmare now and a danger to the kids, so you need to leave. Everything else is secondary to the safety and security of the kids in this home, who didn't ask for any of this and deserve not to live in this environment. Now, for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me through all this. So after I decided to leave, I packed up my stuff and took the kids to my mom's place. It was a tight squeeze, but we managed. The first few days were rough. My husband kept calling and texting, alternating between apologizing and blaming me for everything. I tried to ignore most of it, but it was hard. My mom was a big help, though. She took the boys to school and helped with the baby so I could get some rest. About a week in, I made a mistake that changed everything. I was exhausted and overwhelmed, and I accidentally sent a text meant for my mom to my husband. In the text, I vented about how I felt trapped and how I didn't know if I could ever go back to him. I also mentioned that I was considering filing for divorce. As soon as I realized what I'd done, I panicked. I knew he would blow up, and he did. He called me immediately, screaming and demanding to know why I was talking about divorce behind his back. I tried to explain that it was just a moment of frustration, but he wouldn't listen. He accused me of plotting against him and trying to turn the kids against him. He even threatened to take me to court for custody of our daughter. I was terrified. I didn't want to lose my baby, but I also didn't want to go back to that toxic environment. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations and emotional breakdowns. I found a lawyer who specialized in family law, and she helped me understand my rights and what I could do to protect myself and the kids. She also suggested that I document everything, which I started doing religiously. Every text, every call, every interaction went into a file. Meanwhile, my husband started showing up at my mom's house unannounced. He would stand outside, yelling and demanding to see the kids. My mom called the police a couple of times, but they said there wasn't much they could do unless he actually tried to break in or hurt someone. It was a nightmare. One day, my oldest son came to me and said he didn't want to see his stepdad anymore. He said he was scared of him and didn't like how he treated me. It broke my heart, but I knew I had to listen to him. I told my husband that he couldn't see the kids until we had a formal custody arrangement in place. He was furious, but I stood my ground. During this time, I started to see a therapist. She helped me understand that my husband's behavior was not my fault, and that I needed to take care of myself and my kids first. She also helped me see that I had been ignoring some red flags for a long time. For example, my husband had always been a bit controlling, but I had brushed it off as him being protective. Now I realized that it was part of a pattern of behavior that had escalated after the baby was born. As the days went by, I started to feel stronger. I focused on my kids and tried to create a sense of normalcy for them. We went to the park, did homework together, and had movie nights. It wasn't easy, but it was better than living in constant fear and tension. Then, about 2 weeks after I left, my husband showed up at my mom's house again. This time, he was calm and asked if we could talk. I agreed, but only if we met in a public place. We went to a nearby coffee shop, and he started by apologizing for everything. He said he realized he needed help and had already scheduled an appointment with a therapist. He begged me to come back, saying he couldn't live without us. I was torn. Part of me wanted to believe him and give him another chance, but another part of me was scared that things would go back to the way they were. I told him I needed time to think and that I couldn't make any promises. He seemed to understand, but I could see the desperation in his eyes. After that meeting, I talked to my therapist and my lawyer. They both advised me to be cautious and to prioritize my safety and the kids' well-being. I decided to give my husband a chance to prove that he was serious about changing, but I made it clear that I wouldn't move back in until I saw real, consistent progress. Over the next few days, my husband started going to therapy and even joined a support group for new fathers. He sent me updates and asked if he could see the kids. I agreed to supervised visits at my mom's house, and he was on his best behavior. The kids were happy to see him, but I could tell they were still wary. During one of our conversations, my husband opened up about his own struggles. He admitted that he had been feeling overwhelmed and inadequate as a father and husband. He said he felt like he was failing us and didn't know how to cope. It was the first time he had ever been so vulnerable with me, and it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. But before I get into that, I need to mention something important. While all this was happening, I found out something about my husband's past that I hadn't known before. My mom told me that when he was younger, his father had been hurtful and controlling. He had never talked about it, but it explained a lot about his behavior. It made me realize that he was repeating patterns he had learned as a child, and it gave me a new perspective on his actions. So here we are now. My husband is working on himself, and I'm focusing on taking care of my kids and myself. It's not easy, and I don't know what the future holds, but I'm hopeful that we can find a way to move forward, whether that's together or apart. Thanks for reading. Am I the idiot for divorcing my husband because he couldn't prioritize our son's emergency over his trauma? Why female? Have been married to my husband, male, for 2 years. He has a habit of sitting in the car for 5-10 minutes before entering the house. I don't know why he does it, but he talked about a past traumatic experience he had when he came home and caught his ex cheating on him. Because of that, he would spend a few minutes in his car before entering his home as a response to his trauma. Now, I won't say that he's wrong in coping with what happened, but this has made me feel uneasy, and it has caused many fights between us. Like when we have guests, he would sit outside before coming in, or when dinner is waiting for him, and he would take 10 minutes silently sitting in the car. I was worried that something might come up and he does not respond properly. And it happened last week. My 8-year-old son tripped and fell from the stairs and broke his ankle. He was in so much pain, and I called my husband to come take him to the hospital. He rushed out of work, but then I called, and then I was stunned when I looked out the window and saw him sitting outside the house in his car. I was both shocked and angry. I ran outside and asked how long he had been sitting in the car. He told me around 8 minutes. I asked why he didn't come into the house immediately to help, and he said he would after 2 more minutes. I was so mad and hurt but tried to rush him, and he insisted he wouldn't feel comfortable coming in until the 10 minutes were up. He told me to get my son ready to take him to the hospital, but I started screaming at him nonstop, telling him this was a family emergency and that he was out of his mind to behave like that. It might not have been my best response, but I was shocked by his behavior and quite concerned because I had this situation always stuck in the back of my mind, thinking about what my husband would do when there's a family emergency. I ended up taking my son by myself when my neighbor intervened and offered to take us. We went to the hospital, and later my husband came and tried to talk to me, but I refused. I then went to stay with my mom and texted him that I wanted a divorce. He tried to rationalize and justify what he had done, saying he could not help it and that he was nervous and wanted to help my son but felt stuck. I refused to reply to his messages, and days later his family literally harassed me, saying I was making my husband's trauma more severe and that I disrespected his boundaries by pushing him off his limits. I feel lost and unable to think because of the whole ordeal. My family is with me on this, but they can be biased sometimes. My husband is still trying to basically talk me out of divorce, saying I'm making a huge deal out of it. I feel like I no longer have trust in him, especially when it comes to serious stuff like how cold he acted in a family emergency. To add, my son isn't his biological son. We don't have children together. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot when it comes to you wanting to divorce your husband. What I don't really understand is why you didn't pick up your 8-year-old and rushed him to the car as soon as you looked out the window and saw your husband had arrived. I don't understand why you went outside and had a discussion/argument when your 8-year-old was inside on his own with a broken ankle. Comment 2. I'm just picturing him collapsed on the floor having a heart attack, and she calmly looks at her watch and says she needs to wait 10 minutes because she was traumatized by him not helping their son in an emergency. He clearly needs professional help, and if it was me, I'd make it a condition of continuing the relationship. Not the idiot now, for the update. Hey everyone, a lot has happened since my last post. After I texted my husband that I wanted a divorce, things got even more complicated. He started showing up at my mom's house trying to talk to me. I avoided him at first, but eventually, I agreed to meet him at a nearby park to discuss things. He was visibly upset and kept saying he didn't want to lose me. He admitted that his behavior was irrational, but insisted that his trauma made it hard for him to act differently. He promised to go to therapy and work on his issues if I gave him another chance. I was torn because, on one hand, I could see he was genuinely distressed. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake off the image of him sitting in the car while our son was in pain. A few days later, I got a call from my son's school. He had been in a fight with another kid. When I got there, the principal told me that my son had been acting out and seemed very angry lately. I realized that the stress from the situation with my husband was affecting him too. I felt guilty for not noticing sooner and decided to focus on my son for a while. I took him to a child psychologist to help him deal with his emotions. During one of the sessions, the psychologist suggested that my son might be feeling insecure because of the instability at home. This hit me hard because I wanted to provide a stable environment for him, and it seemed like I was failing. Meanwhile, my husband's family continued to pressure me. They kept calling and texting, saying I was being unreasonable and that I should support my husband through his trauma. It was overwhelming, and I started to doubt my decision. My mom tried to shield me from their calls, but it was impossible to avoid them completely. One day, my husband's sister showed up at my mom's house unannounced. She was very emotional and begged me to reconsider the divorce. She said that my husband had been through a lot and that he needed me now more than ever. I felt a pang of sympathy, but also frustration, because it seemed like everyone was focusing on his needs and not mine or my son's. In the midst of all this, I found out that my husband had been talking to his ex. He claimed it was just to get closure and that he wanted to understand why she cheated on him. This felt like a betrayal, especially since he hadn't mentioned it to me. When I confronted him, he said he didn't want to upset me further and that it was a mistake. I couldn't believe he had kept this from me, and it made me question his commitment to our marriage even more. I decided to move forward with the divorce. I contacted a lawyer and started the paperwork. My husband was devastated and tried to convince me to go to couples therapy instead. I agreed to one session, just to see if it could help. During the session, the therapist pointed out that my husband's trauma was affecting our relationship in a significant way, and that he needed to address it individually before we could work on our marriage. My husband reluctantly agreed to start individual therapy, but I could see he was still hoping I would change my mind about the divorce. As the weeks went by, my son started to improve with the help of the psychologist. He seemed happier and more relaxed, which was a relief. However, my husband's behavior became more erratic. He would show up at my mom's house late at night, begging to talk to me. He even tried to talk to my son at school, which made me furious. I told him to stop, but he seemed desperate and out of control. One night, my husband showed up drunk. He was crying and saying he couldn't live without me. My mom called the police because she was scared for our safety. They took him away, and I felt a mix of sadness and relief. It was clear that he was struggling, but I couldn't let his issues drag me and my son down. After that incident, I got a restraining order against him. His family was furious and accused me of being heartless. They said I was ruining his life and that I should be more understanding. It was hard to deal with their accusations, but I knew I had to protect myself and my son. As I navigated the divorce process, I started to reflect on my own past and how it had shaped my decisions. I realized that I had a pattern of trying to fix people who were broken. My first marriage had ended because my ex-husband was an alcoholic, and I had spent years trying to help him before I finally gave up. I saw a similar pattern with my current husband, and it made me question why I kept finding myself in these situations. I remembered a conversation I had with my dad before he passed away. He had told me that I deserved to be happy and that I shouldn't settle for someone who couldn't give me the love and support I needed. Those words stuck with me, and I realized that I had been ignoring my own needs for too long. I decided to focus on myself and my son, and to stop trying to fix others at the expense of my own well-being. The divorce was finalized a month later. My husband was devastated, but he eventually accepted it. He continued with therapy, and I hoped that he would find some peace and healing. As for me, I felt a sense of relief and freedom. It was a difficult journey, but I knew I had made the right decision for myself and my son. Thanks for reading. Am I the idiot for letting my daughter choose her late father's brother to walk her down the aisle? Instead of her stepdad, I, female, 46 years old, got pregnant with my daughter Sarah, female, 26 years old when I was in college. My parents and my then boyfriend's parents pushed us to marry, which we did. Unfortunately, my late husband passed away a week after our daughter's second birthday due to a previously unknown heart complication. It was a very difficult time for me, and I went through severe depression. 4 years later, I met my current husband, Robert, male, 46 years old, on a blind date set up by a friend. He was my best friend's cousin. We hit it off and got married a year later. Even while we were dating, Robert was very involved with my daughter, and she started calling him Papa fairly quickly. Even after we got married and I got pregnant 2 years into the marriage, giving birth to twins, male 17 years old and female 17 years old, he continued to act as a father figure to Sarah. She was even included in my husband's family reunions and their annual Christmas cousin group photo shoot. Things changed when Sarah turned 18. She began calling him by his first name, which surprised both Robert and me. I asked Robert about it, but he didn't know the reason either. I thought the situation would go back to normal, but she has consistently referred to him by his first name. So I asked her if we could talk about it. Sarah agreed, and Robert asked if he could join the conversation. In short, my daughter overheard my husband talking to his friend about a Father's Day trip to a hostel. The friend asked him if he had forgotten to include Sarah, since he only asked for 3 bedrooms. My husband responded that he planned the trip for his real children. Sarah felt betrayed and hurt because she saw him as her real dad, even though she knew he was her stepdad. My husband tried to explain that he loved her as a father, but his love for the twins, his biological children, was different. I wanted to shut him up because he was overusing the word real, but Sarah asked us to leave her room. To make matters worse, it was her last week with us before she left the country for college. Since then, whenever she comes home, Sarah acts as if nothing happened but continues to call Robert by his first name. Robert didn't want to create more tension and tolerated it. Now, for an update, a few years have passed since then, and my daughter announced her engagement to her longtime boyfriend. We were thrilled for her since they started dating in college. 2 weeks before their wedding, we wondered who would walk Sarah down the aisle. I assumed it would be Robert, thinking we had moved past the incident, but my daughter laughed at me when I suggested it. She said, "Isn't it obvious that Uncle Greg, my late husband's brother, would do that? Besides, I'm not his real daughter. It wouldn't make sense for him to walk me down the aisle." I didn't argue. Instead, I apologized for my ignorance and told her I would speak with Robert, since he also assumed he would be the one. When I told him what Sarah said, he was angry. But when I reminded him of the incident years ago, he became even more upset and insisted that Sarah should move on since it was a long time ago. Feeling offended on behalf of my daughter, I told him he shouldn't be upset because he doesn't see her as his real child anyway. He became teary-eyed and asked me not to speak to him. He still attended Sarah's wedding but appeared visibly unhappy. We are currently not on good terms and are pretending in front of relatives. My daughter is unaware of this, and I want to keep it that way. However, it has been a week since her wedding, and Robert is still upset. He only talks to me about the twins and household matters, but beyond that, he keeps to himself. I feel terrible and believe he is acting this way because of me. So, without further ado, am I the idiot? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Robert brought this on himself. He acted as her father from the time she was 2 years old, so he is the only father she has ever been aware of. Yet he called her not his real child and was careless and cruel enough to do so where she overheard him. Of course, the consequence of that mean attitude is that she doesn't consider him to be her dad. He created this situation. Now he is continuing to be immature and cruel by punishing you for stating the reality of the situation. I think you need to talk to him, and because of his immature attitude, you should probably do it in the presence of a mediator, like a family therapist, if you can afford one. If you can't afford one, I would show him this. He will hurt his relationship with you if he doesn't man up and take responsibility. He could have been doing his best to repair the damage his cruel comment made, but didn't bother. So of course Sarah assumes nothing has changed. He is not the wronged person here. She is. Comment 2. Not the idiot. Your husband is, but you're the idiot for not taking Sarah's feelings seriously. 8 years ago, when she finally revealed why she started calling him Robert, and Robert himself kept reiterating she wasn't his real daughter. Like WTF? Why did you stay with this man for nearly a decade without dealing with his comments about Sarah not being his real daughter? How the hell did you think we moved past it? When she would come home from uni and basically kept calling him Robert? I mean, yay, you stood up for her over the wedding aisle stuff, but you didn't deal with it earlier. Now, for the update, thanks for reading my last post. A lot has happened in the week since Sarah's wedding. The tension between Robert and me has only grown worse. I tried to talk to him about it, but he just shuts down every time I bring up the subject. He's been spending more time at work and less time at home. which has made things even more difficult. The twins have noticed the strain between us, and I can tell they're worried, but they haven't said anything directly. On Monday, I decided to take a day off work to clear my head and think about how to fix things. I went for a walk in the park, and that's when I ran into Greg, Sarah's uncle. We chatted for a bit, and he mentioned how happy he was to walk Sarah down the aisle. He also said something that caught me off guard. He told me that Sarah had confided in him about how she felt like an outsider in our family ever since she overheard Robert's conversation years ago. She felt like she never truly belonged, and that's why she chose Greg to walk her down the aisle. Hearing this broke my heart. I realized that Sarah had been carrying this pain for years, and I hadn't done enough to address it. I felt like I had failed her as a mother. I thanked Greg for the talk and went home, determined to make things right. When I got home, I found Robert in the living room, staring at an old photo album. It was filled with pictures of our family, including many of Sarah and Robert together. I sat down next to him and tried to talk to him again. This time, he opened up a bit. He told me that he felt like he had lost Sarah and that he didn't know how to fix it. He admitted that he regretted what he said years ago and that he wished he could take it back. I told him about my conversation with Greg and how Sarah felt like an outsider. Robert looked devastated. He said he never wanted Sarah to feel that way and that he loved her like his own daughter. We both agreed that we needed to talk to Sarah and try to mend our relationship with her. The next day, we called Sarah and asked if we could meet up. She agreed, and we met at a cafe near her apartment. We started by apologizing for everything that had happened and for not addressing her feelings sooner. Sarah listened quietly, and then she told us how hurt she had been all these years. She said she felt like she had to put up a wall to protect herself from getting hurt again. Robert was in tears by the time she finished talking. He told her how much he loved her and how sorry he was for making her feel like she didn't belong. Sarah started crying too, and they hugged for what felt like an eternity. It was a very emotional moment, but it felt like a step in the right direction. After that, things started to improve. Robert and Sarah began to rebuild their relationship, and I could see the change in both of them. They started spending more time together, and Robert made a conscious effort to show Sarah that she was an important part of our family. However, not everything was resolved. The twins were still feeling the tension between Robert and me. They asked me what was going on, and I had to explain the situation to them. They were upset, especially my son, who looked up to Robert as a role model. He couldn't understand why Robert had said those things about Sarah. I tried to reassure him that Robert was trying to make things right, but it was clear that the twins were struggling with the situation. In the midst of all this, I discovered something that forced me to make a hard choice. While cleaning out the attic, I found an old letter from my late husband. It was addressed to me and written shortly before he passed away. In the letter, he expressed his hopes and dreams for Sarah and me. He also mentioned that he had a life insurance policy that I didn't know about. The policy was worth a significant amount of money, and he wanted it to be used for Sarah's future. I was torn. On one hand, this money could help Sarah and her new husband start their life together. On the other hand, I knew that revealing this secret could cause more tension between Robert and me. I decided to talk to Sarah about it first. She was shocked but grateful. She said she wanted to use the money to buy a house and start a family. I was happy for her, but I knew I had to tell Robert. When I told Robert about the letter and the insurance policy, he was surprisingly understanding. He said that he wanted what was best for Sarah and that he supported my decision to give her the money. This was a huge relief, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. As the week came to an end, I felt like we were finally starting to heal as a family. There were still challenges ahead, but I was hopeful that we could overcome them together. Thank you for reading. If you liked this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day!